Budget builds are well and truly back, and in this video I'm going to be building the best RTX 3060 gaming PC build you can put together for under $1,000. I'll be walking and talking you through all the components in this system, how to go ahead and assemble it step by step, and looking at performance a little bit later. Strap in, because this budget build extravaganza is about to get exciting. The Corsair iQ5000T provides the ultimate in airflow, RGB lighting and mounting compatibility for PC builds in 2022. With 3 alloy fans included, 160 addressable RGB lights in the front, roof and floor panels, Corsair have really taken things up a notch. Learn more about the awesome 5000T in our build videos over on the channel or at the where to buy links in the description below. Let's kick things off as always by taking a look at the beating heart of this build. In other words, the processor that I've selected to use. This is Intel's latest and greatest Core i5-12400F. This is a more budget alternative to their 12600K, their top-end i5, but it still provides awesome performance, plenty of cores, and fast clock speeds for playing the latest titles. Intel 12th Gen is on fire right now, not literally, thankfully, and we've covered it loads on our website, so go and give that a read and learn about why we love Intel 12th Gen just so much, especially compared to its Ryzen 5000 alternatives. Now, to install our CPU, we need to pick ourselves up a solid motherboard, and because I'm very clever, I've gone and pop the motherboard box right under this pile of other components. So let's see if we can gently, nearly, but no. Pick out our motherboard today, which is this Gigabyte B660DS3H. There's a few key things that you need to look out for when shopping for an Intel 12th Gen motherboard, and this Gigabyte budget option really does tick all of those boxes. Alongside, of course, support for the latest Intel 12th Gen processors, that one's pretty obvious. It's also... Why? What is wrong with this? This SSD has a mind of its own today, ladies and gents. No! Stay there! No! Stay there. Right, try this again. With 4 RAM DIMM slots up here, we've got, of course, support for plenty of memory and dual channel performance later down the line. You've then got plenty of room for any of the latest Gen 4 PCIe SSDs. It's not got a heatsink, which makes it a bit ugly, but it is going to do the job a-okay for us today. And then if we head around to the rear I/O, you've got USB-C, USB 10 gigabit, and of course, Wi-Fi 6E. Perfect for getting your build connected if you haven't got Ethernet or easy access to the router where your gaming setup is. They do a non-Wi-Fi version of this board, which is slightly cheaper, and I'll link both of those options alongside everything today down in the description below. I'm really excited to see what AMD are going to do with their next-gen Ryzen 7000, purely on the basis that Intel 12th Gen is so good. I think we could have a bit of a fight on our hands. And the last thing that we need is one dominant CPU manufacturer for the next 4 years, because that's just gets very boring recommending the same things over and over again. While we're here with our CPU, I'm also going to go ahead and install the CPU cooler. Now, I think this one's going to be a bit controversial. It could get me into some trouble, but hear me out. Let me explain. So this is the included Intel stock cooler that you get with your i5-12400F. It's going to do an okay job of keeping the CPU cool. We certainly won't see any thermal throttling, which is where your CPU has to slow down to account for the fact it's running too hot. We should avoid that today fairly easily. It's just not going to give us any overclocking headroom, something we don't have anyway. An aftermarket unit like Cooler Master's Hyper 212 Evo would be a pretty good alternative if you want to spend just a bit more money and get maybe a slightly quieter system. My recommendation, try the stock cooler first, because you've got it anyway, it's not costing you any money, and then if you'd prefer something a bit better later, just upgrade. Spend the $25, $30, a-okay, no problemos, as we would say, but at least see if you can save that money first of all. Once the cooler is in, we can then go ahead and move on to the memory choice. I've gone for a 16 gigabyte kit of Geil, I still don't know how to pronounce that. Let me know in the comments below. DDR4. You can get it in red as on the box, or we've gone for a more grey kit today, as that's just going to plainly look, oh dear, plainly going to look a little bit better, especially with our more neutral colour scheme. To install your RAM is super simple. All you need to do is pop back the clips on your RAM DIMM slots and then locate the notch on the memory and line this up with the notch on the slots themselves. That looks okay to me. Apply some pressure to either side and your RAM will click in. You get that nice satisfying click sound as well, so you literally can't go wrong with this step. This is RGB, and we can customize this later in our motherboard's software. There is one last component to deal with on the motherboard, and that is our storage. I've gone for this WD Blue SN570. It's a Gen 3 drive, but it still gives us around 3.5 gigabytes per second of read speeds, which is going to make sure our game boot up times, our Windows load times are nice and snappy. And even if you've got a really fast internet connection, you'll still be able to download games at full bandwidth. This is a 1TB unit, but if budget's a bit more tight for you, or prices in your region are just that little bit more expensive, I would recommend picking up a 500 gig drive, as it's going to cost you about 40% less than this larger 1TB variant. We're going to be installing our M.2 drive into the very top slot on the motherboard. That's this one here. A note, if you are going to pick this motherboard up for Gen 4 storage, I'd recommend picking up a drive with a heatsink, as this motherboard doesn't seem to include any as standard. A bit of a bummer, but I see why Gigabyte have done it as a more cost-saving measure. Regular viewers of the channel will know what's coming next. You need to ditch your full screwdriver in favour for a small teeny tiny screwdriver like this one. Maybe one day we should launch the official GeekaWhat teeny tiny screwdriver. Let me know in the comments down below. I'm going to remove our standoff screw that's already installed, slide our drive into place, sort of at a 45-degree angle, and then push it down. We're then going to add on a screw to fasten it all in and make sure our drive is not likely to go anywhere. Nice and simple. A little something like this, and the whole motherboard assembly is now finished. Now, in a budget build, one of the easiest ways to save money is the case. Another way is the power supply, but you've got to be careful saving money there. The case is a much easier way to save yourself some cash. When it comes to a case, you can't really go too far wrong, other than looking for chassis that have got decent airflow. If you take a look at this AeroCool Hive design, it's got plenty of mesh at the front, and as long as you've got that with a couple of included fans, your temperatures and your noise and your thermals are going to be a-okay. Picking up a good case saves you loads of headaches later and allows us to get away with using a smaller cooler design like the Intel stock cooler. Now, what we're going to do with our case is we're going to carefully lay it flat on the table. All your cables will come loose and it's all very scary, but don't worry, you're a-okay. And then we can slide the case over, and that's going to make it easier to actually install the motherboard into place. Now, there's a few things we need to do before going all hasty and whacking the motherboard in, screwing it in with gusto, and creating problems for us later. The first is popping in our I/O shield. If you've got a more budget-oriented case, it'll include a little metal shield like this one. That's going to create the gap, basically, between the edge of the motherboard and the case, and make sure that the I/O is not just floating about in no man's land. They can be quite sharp, so be careful with them, but they click in nice and easily with a few satisfying click sounds. After that, we're going to take our motherboard assembly, which is now all complete, and locate each of the holes through the motherboard. You'll see here we've got 3 at the top, a further 3 along the middle, and 3 down the bottom. These are what we'll be using to actually fasten some screws in and install it into the case. But we need to make sure that we have corresponding places to screw the motherboard in inside the chassis. Looking here, we've got 3 gold-coloured standoffs. They look a-okay, and a further 3 down the middle. The 2 at the bottom look fine, but there's a stray one here, which is in the wrong place. We need to move that from there down into our bottom right corner. A pair of pliers will do this, and then you can go ahead and install the motherboard. Wrong place standoffs can cause massive headaches, so please be careful of this, and take your time when it comes to installing your motherboard. And then we're basically done, looking awesome. What we're going to go ahead and do next is install the graphics card. Now, for this build, there was only really one solid choice, and that's the RTX 3060. Now, to be fair, if AMD's 6650 XT came down dramatically in price, that would be a good shout, but it currently struggles to compete with what Nvidia have on offer. There's a few key reasons why this is such a solid choice. It's got a whopping 12 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory. This 2-fan cooler is very well priced, and it does beat out what AMD have got for similar pricing. Expect to see some great deals on GPUs. I mean, prices are already massively down and heading very close, if not below MSRP for a range of cards. This thing is actually a bit of a dark horse or an underdog when it comes to 1440p gaming too, though 1080p is where I'd recommend sticking if you want the best frame rates at the best settings. You do of course get support for ray tracing, slightly less concerned about that on this budget, but DLSS is a massive win, especially 2.0, where in a number of titles you can get around a 30 or 40% frame rate boost with very little, if no noticeable visual fidelity drops. Now, all we need to do is go ahead and pull our case that little bit closer and just whoa, that was nearly bad. And just go ahead and double check that our GPU lines up with the slots and all the PCIe lane covers. Oh yes, that actually seems to be working first time. So we can go ahead, click the GPU in, There we are, nice and easy. You're going to notice a bit of a sag and a bit of a wobble. That is normal, but we're going to correct it and make sure it doesn't happen in the future by actually installing just a couple of screws to fasten it down. There we go, there's the first screw in, and with that one nice and tight, it's going to solve basically all of our GPU movement right away. Do pop the second one in though, just for good measure. That can go up here like so, and screw in nice and tight. Looking fantastic. This is our final component then, the Corsair CX650F. This bad boy is going to provide 650 watts of 80 plus bronze certified power, basically meaning 650 watts of pretty efficient power output to our system today. It's also got an RGB fan installed, because I mean, of course it has, but it's still pretty good value. It's a fairly budget oriented unit, and it strikes a nice balance between price and performance when it comes to a power supply. To be honest with you, I would stick with Cooler Master, Corsair, Asus, Seasonic, any of these, EVGA's another one, any of these core power supply brands when shopping for any unit, as those with good warranties and good reputations are your best shout. I have missed a couple of good power supply manufacturers off there, so don't take that list as gospel and flame me in the comments. I'm an NZXT fan, what about their units? They're pretty good. There's loads of good options out there. Just go for a well-known, reputable brand, because if you don't, you can find yourself in a world of trouble later on. Now, for those wondering, I'm going to go ahead and plug up a GPU, a CPU, a motherboard, and a SATA power connection to our power supply. The rest of the cables we're going to keep nice and safe and sound away in our power supplies box. I'm not normally someone who hoards boxes for power supplies or any other components that I buy, but PSU cables are definitely something you want to keep hold of. What we're then going to do is we're going to spin our case around to install the power supply, which goes just down here in the back. Grab your PSU with a fan up or down orientation. For this build, it doesn't really matter. And line it up with those screws. There we go, at the back of the case. Secure it into place with each of those screws. Then plug up your CPU power connection, motherboard power cable, GPU power connection, and any SATA power connections in that order to make sure the build is nice and juiced up and ready to go. Finally, we're also going to plug up just a couple of our front panel connections. These are the USB ports, headphone and mic jacks, and the power button on the top of the case. USB 3 is the largest of the bunch, and it's notched, so we'll only go in one way round. HD audio goes to the bottom left of the motherboard like so, and has a pin blocked out, meaning only one orientation will fit. USB 2 is next up. There's only one port on this case, and it looks very similar in connection to our HD audio, but the pin missing is a different one. That also goes to the bottom of the motherboard. Finally, you've got your JFP1 fiddly front panel cables. That's a mouthful. They go to the bottom right of the board like so, and we'll pop a diagram on your screen now to make things that little bit easier. Without any further ado though, let's go ahead and jump into some performance benchmarks of this system to see how well it stacks up at 1080p. But first, it's time to see how good it looks in the only way we know how. Roll that montage. Now that we've seen just how good this RTX 3060 build looks in terms of aesthetics, just how well does it perform? We won't have to wait long for the results, ladies and gents, because this is the benchmark section. On your screen now is a summary of all the results that we achieved on this system, testing a wide variety of titles at 1080p high and competitive settings. Let's start off by taking a closer look at Battlefield 2042, working through to all the CODs, Forza Horizon 5, Fortnite and Vanguard a bit later. In Battlefield here we got 87 frames per second on average when testing at 1080p high settings. All of our frame rates were gathered with both NVIDIA FrameView and MSI Afterburner's Reaver Tuner to ensure fairness and consistency between the datasets, and the game here looked amazing. The latest Battlefield is hard to run, so nearly 90 FPS was very impressive. In COD Vanguard, we also got some top tier results. 1080p high settings yielded 115 frames per second on average, providing a really playable and really enjoyable gaming experience. The positive COD news doesn't end there though, as in COD Warzone we got some pretty similar frame rates actually. 1080p high settings we got 111 frames per second on average, with 97 and 80 for our 90 and 99 percentile results. That showed the game performed pretty much consistently above 80 FPS, making of course for a really smooth gaming experience. Forza Horizon 5 was a similar story. Here at 1080p Ultra, we used the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode to test out our frame frame rates. Something you can do at home, run the benchmark mode with our settings, and you can compare apples to apples. We got 86 FPS on average, while the frame rate never really dropped below 70 frames per second. The game looked absolutely stunning, the graphics really good here, and although the game's quite buggy to load, it makes for an awesome gaming experience. Moving on to Apex Legends next up, here we tested out at 1080p high settings. We managed to break the Apex 140 mark, where the game just doesn't want to give you more than this amount of frames, hitting in total 152 FPS on average. 90 and 99th percentile results were solid too, 139 and 124 to be precise, where the game looked really solid. A smooth gaming experience, perfect for you competitive players out there. We also tested out Valorant, because of course, why not? This is a game that's the king of the frame rates, and our results today really demonstrated that. Very easy to run and very well optimized. At 1080p high settings in Valorant, we pulled in 464 frames per second on average, with 90 and 99th percentile results in the region of 420 and 380. This is more than enough to drive any monitor on the market at 1080p. You can even play Valorant at 4K on this system and probably achieve more than 100 frames per second. Finally, the last title on our list today is Fortnite. We tested at 1080p competitive settings, and here it broke that 200 FPS mark. 224 frames per second to be precise. The game looked awesome. Competitive settings is where you tune everything to low except the render distance, which you set to far, for the ultimate high frame rate gaming experience. Thanks for tuning into our video today though. Check out all the products linked at the affiliate links below, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.